Recently, while at the library, I picked up a very interesting book. This book is called Genghis Khan and the Making of the Modern World. It's by Jack Weatherford. It became a New York Times bestseller, and even though it was created in 2004, it remained on the list for many years. And if you go on the internet, there's quite vigorous and robust discussions about it now. What really prompted me to look for a different narrative, because history is built on narrative, is recently I've been looking into the great conquerors. Napoleon, Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar. What was interesting about the Mongols in particular, and Genghis Khan, is that unlike the British, who had a far superior navy, the Romans, who had Roman legions of thousands and thousands of soldiers, and Napoleon, who had thousands and thousands of soldiers at his disposal, the Mongol army had a total of 150,000 soldiers. The population, when their empire reached its peak, was the largest in history. They had 100 million people that they ruled over. If you do the math, 100 million minus 150,000, which is how many soldiers the Mongol army possessed, equates to 99,850,000. Use your thinking cap here. I was thinking to myself, how is it that they were able to control these populations? How were they able to rule over these populations for 162 years? They couldn't have done it just by being tyrannical. If you are to watch a mainstream History Channel documentary, I watched one about him on Biography Channel earlier on YouTube. Any of those mainstream things like Smithsonian, National Geographic, you name it, they paint him as an effigy, as this barbaric figure. Now, Jack Weatherford, on the other hand, talks about the positive contributions of the Mongol Empire, and he attempts to humanize Genghis Khan in the book. My opinion, based on all of the research I've done, I've looked at both sides of the argument, is somewhere in the middle. And that's why I really like history. Unlike movies, superhero good, bad guy bad, which just isn't very interesting to me. If that's your thing, that's your prerogative. I like things that are more ambiguous, that are more nuanced. Most historical figures are not terrible people, but they're not as good as we thought they were. Abe Lincoln is not as good as he's portrayed, and Genghis Khan is not as bad as he's portrayed. Although he was brutal, but he did many positive things and had many positive contributions. But you can't roll over a population of that many people and be a brutal dictator like a Stalin or the Mustache Man from World War II. It's not possible. But if you compare some of the other empires, Rome lasted 1,000 years. They had a population of 45 million people, 1.9 million miles. The Mongols, from 1206 until 1368, they controlled 9 million square miles, 17.81% of the world's total landmass, which was the largest in history. All of the other major empires lasted longer. The British Empire, Alexander the Great's empire, but they didn't acquire as much land. What also stood out to me about Genghis Khan is, unlike Julius Caesar or Napoleon, he didn't view himself as a deity. He didn't view himself as a god. He never lived in a palace. He never viewed himself as a king. After the battles, even when he conquered China, he went back to the steppes. He went back to his tribe. He didn't stay in one place for long. The Mongolians were nomadic people. They were constantly moving around, constantly foraging. He also believed in the sky god. That's what he called him, the god in the blue sky. He believed that the god in the blue sky ordained him to conquer the world. Even at the peak of his power, he lived in the same house, he adorned the same clothing, and he lived in the same conditions that he was brought up in, which was extremely humble conditions. When he was alive, he never had his image minted on a coin. He also never let anybody draw a physical picture or painting of him. No books were written about him. In fact, he would probably be pissed off that I'm talking about him right now, truth be told. The only reason we know about him is because there was a book printed in China, and it was printed in code. It had to be translated over hundreds of years in secret, called The Secret of the Mongols. If it wasn't for that book, sure, we would know about Mongolia. Sure, we would know about the remnants of how the Mongol Empire helped us today. But we wouldn't have known about Genghis Khan. Just like every empire, like Rome, the Senate in Rome is the reason that we have a Senate. If you look at the architecture of Rome, if you look at the stadiums of Rome, most football stadiums, especially older ones, like college stadiums, not the new NFL stadiums, but older stadiums, they resemble the Roman Colosseum. And just like Rome, Mongolia had a large impact, not just on us today, but globally, and we'll get into that. First, let's talk a little bit about Genghis Khan. His original name was Temujin. That's how you pronounce it. It's been a while since I've heard it pronounced. What's interesting is that, unlike Alexander the Great, who ruled the Greek Empire when his dad Philip of Macedonia passed away, or Julius Caesar, who had a united country, Genghis Khan had an area that was just full of random tribes, random kingdoms, and he had to subdue and subjugate those people under his tutelage, under his will, using his charisma, his tactics. There wasn't even a Mongolia when he took over. They were just people in the steppes. That's all they were. They were nomads. And he united all those tribes together and consolidated his power over much of modern-day Mongolia and parts of northern China. One of his most famous accomplishments is the conquest of northern China. Genghis Khan began his conquest in the early 13th century, uniting the Mongol tribes and launching a series of campaigns to subjugate neighboring tribes and kingdoms. By the early 1200s, he had consolidated his power over much of modern-day Mongolia and parts of northern China. Conquest of Central Asia and Persia. They went westward, they conquered Central Asia. They also conquered Persia, modern-day Iran, and Iraq. Conquest of Russia and Eastern Europe. They extended influence into Russia, and they established the Golden Horde. The Golden Horde controlled modern-day Russia, Ukraine, and parts of Eastern Europe. Conquest of the Middle East. It went westward, conquering territories in what are now Georgia, Armenia, and Uzbekistan. I can't pronounce that, but they also launched campaigns into the Middle East, including capturing and sacking the city of Baghdad in 1258. And that's what most Muslim scholars consider the last of the golden age of Islam after the Muslim conquest in the 7th, 8th, 9th centuries. Legacy. And at the end, we'll get into some of the pros and the cons. I don't think he's a god and he's like, the greatest guy in the world like Jack Weatherford. But I also don't think he's a villain and he's the worst piece of shit that ever existed like History Channel does. I'm sort of in the middle. Most things, the more I read and the more I absorb information, I kind of become more moderate in a lot of my opinions. As most people would, with more education and knowledge. Genghis Khan's conquest resulted in the creation of the largest empire in history, stretching from the Pacific Ocean to the Mediterranean Sea. The Mongol Empire facilitated significant, and we'll get into these specifically, cultural and economic exchanges between the East and the West, and it had a lasting impact on the history and development of the regions it conquered. The Mongol Empire was one of the largest continuous land empires in history. While the Mongol Empire did not directly create modern countries in the way we understand them today, its influence did contribute to the formation and shaping of several modern nations. Some of the modern countries that have historical connections to the Mongol Empire include Mongolia. This is the most obvious example, as it is the modern-day homeland of the Mongol people and the successor state to the Mongol Empire. Mongolia was part of the larger empire and has preserved the Mongol cultural heritage. Russia. The Mongol Empire's invasion of Kievan Rus in the 13th century had a profound impact on the region. The Mongol conquest led to the fragmentation of the Kievan Rus and the emergence of the Grand Duchy of Moscow, which eventually evolved into the Russian Empire and later the modern state of Russia. They actually had a trading post called Muscovy, and the Muscovites were one of the founding tribes of the modern country of Russia. China. The Mongol Empire's conquest of China resulted in the establishment of the Yuan dynasty, which ruled over a vast part of present-day China. While the Yuan dynasty was eventually overthrown, it left a lasting impact on Chinese history and culture. Central Asian countries. The Mongol Empire also had a significant impact on the countries of Central Asia, including modern-day Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan. These regions were incorporated into the empire and experienced cultural and demographic changes as well. While the Mongol Empire did not directly create modern nation-states, its influence on the regions it conquered helped shape the historical, cultural, and political developments of these areas, contributing to the formation of the modern countries we know today. It's kind of like Rome, like when Julius Caesar went to what they called Britannica, or Scorpius Africanus went to Africa, one of the great generals in Roman history, and they named it Africa. Yeah, they didn't sit down there like George Washington and become a literal father of the country, but they found these territories, they governed these territories, and they established a lot of geography, cultural, and demographics in those countries today. No Roman Empire, no Britain, no United States, and so on and so forth. The Mongol Empire had a significant impact on Europe, particularly during the 13th century. The most direct impact was through its military campaigns. They invaded Eastern Europe, and by 1241 they had reached as far west as Hungary and Poland. The invasion caused widespread destruction and led to the defeat of several European armies. Cultural and technological exchange. Despite the destructive nature of their conquest, the Mongols facilitated significant cultural, and technological exchanges between Europe and Asia. The Mongol Empire's extensive trade networks, known as the Silk Road, allowed for the exchange of goods, ideas, and technologies between East and West. This facilitated the transfer of knowledge in areas such as science, mathematics, and astronomy from the Islamic world and China to Europe. Influence on military tactics. The Mongol military tactics and strategies, such as their skilled use of cavalry and mobile warfare, had a lasting impact on European military thinking. The European experience with the Mongol invasions led to the adoption of aspects of Mongol military tactics, which influenced the development of European warfare. The Mongol invasion also had a political impact on Europe. The disintegration of Kievan Rus and the weakening of the Cumans and other regional powers created a power vacuum that allowed for the rise of new states such as the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, the Kingdom of Hungary, and other countries that were significant in European history. Economic impact. The Mongol Empire's control over territories and trade routes had economic implications for Europe. The disruption of trade routes and the destruction caused by Mongol invasions initially had a negative impact on many European countries. However, the eventual reopening of the Silk Road under Mongol rule facilitated increased trade and cultural exchange between Europe and Asia. Overall, the impact of the Mongol Empire on Europe was complex and multifaceted, influencing various aspects of European society, economy, and culture during the Middle Ages. The Mongol Pazai, also known as the Pazia, was a tablet carried by messengers and officials in the Mongol Empire to signify authority and to facilitate travel. They were made of various metals such as wood, leather, and were inscribed with the official's name, his mission, and the privileges granted to him by the ruling Khan. What's interesting is that this was the first, based on archaeological evidence. Now, something new could come out of the woodwork. This is, as far as we know, based on evidence, the first passport that was used. It was a diplomatic passport, and it allowed them to demand food, shelter, and they built kind of like how the Romans, they built areas where you could get water on the Roman roads. They built areas where you could rest your horse, and then you could get another horse that was fresh for the journey. It was kind of like a modern day truck stop. The significance also allowed communication. One of the things that made the Mongols so powerful was their trade routes. Just like the Romans built roads, just like the British controlled the seas, the Mongols controlled trade routes. And that had a profound impact on the world, led to different technologies, religions, and languages, and contributed to the development of a more global economy. They had the Silk Road. They also had other trade routes, such as the Steppe Route, and that connected the nomadic regions of Central Asia, and the Maritime Route, which linked the ports of the Indian Ocean and East Asia. These routes played a crucial role in the exchange of commodities such as silk, spices, precious metals, and cultural and intellectual ideas. It's kind of like when the internet opened up. If you wanted to get, let's say that you liked the Dallas Cowboys, but you lived in Canada. You wanted to get a Dallas Cowboys hat. How are you going to find one? Amazon created the marketplace where you could get goods developed to your home. And you notice with the internet, which connects more people together, it also innovates new industries, and it also develops new connections. And that's essentially what the Mongols did with their trade routes. Here is a brief overview of the factors that contributed to the decline of the Mongol Empire. Now, it didn't fall suddenly or due to a single cause. Its disintegration was a gradual process influenced by a combination of internal strife, administrative difficulties, and military pressures. Fragmentation under successors is the first reason why. After the death of Genghis Khan in 1227, the empire was divided among his sons and family members. Although the empire remained united under the rule of Genghis Khan, the individual Khans began to operate more independently, pursuing their own interests and policies. The fragmentation was exacerbated after the death of Kublai Khan in 1294, who was the last of the great Khans to rule over a unified empire. We see that a lot in history. You'll have the last good rulers. Like in Rome, they called them the five good emperors. Trajan and Marcus Aurelius was the last good emperor, and then he put his son Commodus as emperor after he passed away, and that was considered the first of the bad Roman emperors. Difficulty in governing diverse territories. The Mongol Empire spanned across diverse cultures and geographies, from China in the east to Europe in the west. Governing such a vast territory with diverse populations proved to be an enormous challenge, especially given the nomadic roots of the Mongols and their relatively small numbers in comparison to the populations they ruled over. We talked about that earlier, that I found it hard to believe that he was such a barbarian and he was like a cartoon villain when he was able to control these territories and administer them with a solid government. But when you get bad rulers in there, as we're seeing in the world today, when you have incompetent leaders, it causes disenfranchisement with the population. Rebellions and loss of control. As the central authority weakened, various regions under Mongol control began to resist and revolt. In China, the Mongol dynasty that ruled China, was overthrown by the Chinese Ming dynasty in 1368. Similarly, in Persia, and I can't pronounce that, it's Ilkhanate disintegrated into smaller states, and in Russia, the Golden Horde lost territory to emerging Russian principalities. Economic strain and overextension. The cost of administering and defending such a large empire was immense. The empire's reliance on conquest and tributes to maintain its economy was not sustainable in the long term, especially as the conquest slowed and tributes diminished. It's not politically correct to say, but there are pros and cons of empires. Actually, believe it or not, Rome actually lost more money administrating their territories, like Britannica and parts of Africa, than they actually gained in tax revenue. The only province of Rome where they actually gained more revenue, and that was simply due to the grain in Egypt, was Egypt, which fed the majority of the population. And that was really the only province. But when you had to pay for the governors, like Herod the Great, he ruled over modern-day Israel, which was a province of Rome. You have to pay for the administration, you have to pay for the military, you have to pay for all these other things. And typically, you're not going to make more than you spend. And if you stop conquering territories, you're not going to gain more territories, like the pyramid scheme, and you can keep paying and paying and paying. But that's another story for another day. Death of key leaders and succession issues. The death of strong leaders often led to power struggles and civil wars, as was the cause after the death of Mongol Khan in 1259. These internal conflicts weakened the political cohesion and military prowess of the Mongols. Cultural and religious differences. The Mongols were generally tolerant of different religions and cultures within their empire. But such diversity also meant they had difficulty imposing any unifying ideology or loyalty beyond the forces of arms. As their military dominance waned, so too did their ability to command allegiance from the conquered people. And that's what's also interesting about people like Napoleon, Julius Caesar, Alexander the Great, and Genghis Khan. When they took over a territory, if you submitted to them, they basically said, okay, we're going to let you stay in power. You got to pay tribute to me. You got to supply me with troops when I need them. And you got to not rebel against me. But other than that, you can practice what religion you want. You can practice what lack of religion you want. You can believe what you want. Do what you're going to do. Have your own culture. Have your own language. The Mongols also didn't export their language to other populations. They didn't make people speak Mongolian. Which is crazy because if you think about this, you can make the case that Alexander the Great and Genghis Khan were a lot more libertarian and tolerant after, of course, you were subdued than our own government is today. They wouldn't come after you simply because you spoke out against them or simply because you had different ideologies. And we're seeing that today in the West. Emergence of strong rival powers. Over time, new powers rose that could challenge Mongol supremacy, such as the Mamluks in Egypt, the growing strength of the Ottoman Empire, and the resurgence of Chinese dynasties. And the Mamluks, they ruled Egypt for a long time. It was actually Napoleon Bonaparte in the 1700s who ended up destroying the Mamluk dynasty, and he had the French administrate Egypt. The Mongol Empire never fell in a single catastrophic event, but rather gradually dissolved into various successor states, and by the end of the 14th century. These successor states continued to exert influence in their respective regions, but were no longer united as a single expansive Mongol empire. Now, what was interesting about the Mongols is they had a policy of religious tolerance. They devised a universal alphabet. They maintained relay stations, playing games. They printed almanacs, money. They had advancements, and they were actually the people who created paper money as well. It was really heavy to have to carry paper money across the empire, across that many miles. So they established paper money, which had value for a time, but like any type of currency, like our currency that's backed up by nothing like thin air and the laws of economics, eventually paper money backed up by no real commodity is going to cause inflation. And that was also a reason, but it wasn't given up there, but it was also a reason why the Mongol Empire fell. The Mongols' policy of religious tolerance was a key factor in their ability to roll over such a diverse empire. Unlike many other empires of the time, the Mongols did not impose their own religious beliefs on their subjects. Instead, they allowed religious freedom and often patronized multiple faiths, which helped to maintain stability and harmony within the empire. That's what smart rulers do. When Napoleon took over, he was never religious, but he thought to himself, I'm going to act like I'm a Catholic because that's what most French people believe. Or when he went and he conquered Egypt, he was like, I'm going to let the Muslims have their own religion. All they wanted was to control that territory. They knew, politically speaking, if you left the people alone, they were less likely to rebel. The Mongol approach to governance, characterized by a lack of deep cultural preferences and a focus on practical solutions, allowed them to effectively govern a vast and diverse empire. This pragmatic approach contributed to their success in ruling over such a large and diverse territory. Overall, the Mongols' willingness to adopt and combine systems from different cultures, their pragmatic approach to governance, and their support for religious tolerance were key aspects of their rule, and they contributed to the longevity and stability of the Mongol Empire during its peak. Speaking of paper money, which I spoke of, the Mongols played a significant role in the history of paper money. During the 13th century, the Mongol Empire, under the leadership of Kublai Khan, established a unified monetary system that included the use of paper money, the system known as Chow, and it introduced to address the economic challenges faced by the vast empire. The use of paper money in the Mongol Empire was a significant departure from the metal-based currencies that were prevalent at the time. The Mongols faced logistical challenges in transporting large quantities of metal coins across their expansive territory, so they turned to paper money as a more practical alternative. Under Kublai Khan's rule, the Mongol Empire issued and circulated paper money throughout its territories. These early forms of paper money were backed by the empire's vast resources and were widely accepted for trade and commerce within the empire's borders. The introduction of paper money on the Mongols had a lasting impact on the development of modern banking and finance. It demonstrated the feasibility of using paper money as a medium of exchange, paving the way for the eventual widespread adoption of paper currencies in later centuries. However, it's important to note that the use of paper money in the Mongol Empire was not without its challenges, such as inflation and counterfeiting, leading to the eventual decline of the Chow system. Nevertheless, the Mongols' pioneering use of paper money remains a significant milestone in the history of currency and finance. The legal system of the Mongol Empire, which was established by Genghis Khan and his successors, was characterized by a combination of traditional Mongol customary law and a system of decrees and regulations imposed by the ruling elite. The Mongol legal system was designed to maintain order and facilitate the administration of the vast empire. The Yasa was a code of laws attributed to Genghis Khan that governed various aspects of Mongol life, including social organization, military affairs, and trade. It encompassed principles of justice, loyalty, and obedience, and it applied to both Mongols and non-Mongols within the empire. When Genghis Khan conquered a territory, if you surrendered, he viewed you as part of his empire, that you were on his side. He also did not believe in feudalism. He believed in meritocracy. If somebody was the best, they became the generals in his army. They became the doctors in his empire. He just cared about who was the best and who was good at architecture. He didn't care about privilege. He didn't care about where you came from. Kortali. This was a general assembly or council of Mongol nobles and leaders, which was convened to discuss and decide on important matters, including legal and administrative issues. Decisions made had significant legal and political implications for the empire. Decrees and regulations. The Mongol rulers, including Genghis Khan and his successors, issued decrees and regulations to govern aspects of the empire, such as taxation, trade, and administration of conquered territories. These decrees were enforced by appointed officials and were crucial for maintaining order and stability across the empire. Adaptation of local laws. In many regions of the empire, the Mongols allowed local legal systems and customs to continue as long as they did not conflict with the overarching authority of the empire. This allowed for a degree of legal pluralism within the empire, with local laws coexisting alongside Mongol laws. Military justice. The Mongols placed great emphasis on military discipline and justice within their ranks. Military law governed the conduct of soldiers and officers, and violations were met with swift and often harsh punishment. While the Mongol legal system was not codified or centralized as modern legal systems, it played a crucial role in the maintaining order and facilitating governance across the vast and diverse Mongol Empire. The Mongol Empire impact on the Middle East was profound and had far-reaching consequences for the region. Destruction and loss of life. The Mongol invasion of the Middle East, particularly the sack of Baghdad in 1258, resulted in immense destruction and loss of life. The Abbasid Caliphate, a major center of Islamic civilization, was eradicated, and the city of Baghdad, known for its wealth and cultural heritage, was ransacked, leading to the deaths of a significant portion of its population. And at that time, Baghdad was the center of cultural exchange. You had libraries, you had scientific advancements, you had many other intellectual pursuits like mathematics and philosophy that was minted there. Political change. The Mongol conquest led to significant reconfiguration of political power in the region. The traditional political order was upended, and new Mongol-led dynasties emerged. These dynasties ruled over the territories they had conquered, often adopting certain aspects of local government and administration. Economic impact. The Mongol invasion disrupted trade routes and economic infrastructure in the Middle East, leading to a decline in economic activity and prosperity in many areas. Cultural exchange. Despite the destruction brought by the invaders, they facilitated cultural exchange and transmission of ideas across Eurasia. They also facilitated communication and trade between different regions, contributing to the exchange of goods, technologies, and knowledge. Decline of Islamic civilizations. The Mongol invasions are often seen as contributing to the decline of Islamic civilizations in the Middle East. The destruction of major cities, including Baghdad, and the disruption of political and cultural institutions had long-term consequences for the region's intellectual and cultural development. Overall, the Mongol impact on the Middle East was a complete mix of destruction, political change, economic disruption, and cultural exchange. The consequences of the Mongol invasions reverberated throughout the region for centuries, shaping its trajectory in significant ways. Now here is some key impacts of Genghis Khan individually. Genetic legacy. Studies have shown that Genghis Khan left a significant genetic footprint. An estimated 0.5% of the male population in the world, around 16 million descendants, he had multiple wives and multiple kids, is thought to carry his Y chromosome due to the vast territory he conquered and the children he fathered. Cultural exchange. The Mongol Empire served as a massive conduit for cultural exchange across the Eurasian continent. The Mongols' promotion of the Silk Road trade routes allowed for the transfer of goods, technology, and ideas between East and West. Diplomacy and communication. Genghis Khan established a Pony Express-style relay system of stations known as YAM, which was an efficient network for communications across the vast empire. This system promoted diplomatic relations and efficient governance. Military tactics. The Mongol military was highly organized, disciplined, and innovative. The use of compound bows, superior horsemanship, and psychological warfare were among their key tactics. Modern military organizations still study the Mongols' tactics. What's interesting is that they used a bow. They didn't have any infantry, they just used cavalry. But every Mongol kid, when they were young, knew how to ride a horse from when they were young. But their soldiers were constantly on the move, on their horses, making it hard to shoot them, and then they were constantly shooting at you. It was a moving target that was constantly shifting, and unlike other conventional armies that were all together as one unit, they were constantly changing positions, and they were in different groups. It made it very hard to defeat them. The legal code, we got into that. But the system emphasized meritocracy and religious tolerance, unlike feudalism and other more totalitarian ideas that were prevalent during that day. Geopolitical boundaries. The Mongol invasion and the subsequent empire reshaped the boundaries of many countries in the 13th century. Some of the modern borders in Central Asia, Russia, and the Middle East still reflect the conquest of the Mongol Empire. They also contributed to destruction and rebuilding. They had to rebuild and develop infrastructure such as roads, canals, and cities. Russia and China, we got into that. Religious impacts. The Mongol Empire, was known for its religious tolerance. This allowed for the coexistence and spread of Islam, Christianity, Buddhism, and other religions across the empire. Genghis Khan's historical role is complex with both brutal and progressive elements. His empire's influence has had long-lasting effects that can still be traced in various aspects of modern societies throughout the former Mongol territories and beyond. So they had land conquest, saved trade routes, cultural exchange, administrative and diplomatic links, spread of ideas and technologies. So those were the good things that they had. Their military tactics, political, trade in the Silk Road, cultural exchange, demographic changes. They are also, some historians suggest that the Mongol conquest helped spread the bubonic plague, which decimated populations across Asia and later Europe in the mid-14th century. So here's the territories that they controlled. Northern China, Kievan Rus, which is Eastern Europe, Persia, including the Persian Empire and Abbasid Empire, Georgia and Armenia, Korea, Hungary, Poland, Vietnam, Syria, Baghdad. Here are the weapons that they used. Composite bow, that was their most famous weapon. The primary weapon of the Mongol army was the composite bow, a type of recurve bow that was small enough to be used effectively from horseback, but powerful enough to penetrate armor at a considerable distance. Arrows. The Mongols used a variety of arrowheads, each suited for different purposes, such as armor piercing, blunt heads for stunning, or incendiary tips for setting structures on fire. Sword. The Mongols also carried a curved sword known as a scimitar, or a straight sword for close combat. Lance and spear. Lances and spears were also used, especially for mounted charges and for fighting against foot soldiers. Axe and mace. Some carried axes or maces, which were effective against armored opponents. Siege machinery. For sieges, the Mongols employed various machines such as ballistate, catapults, and even forms of cannons and gunpowder weapons, often learning and adapting technologies from the civilizations they conquered. Armor, leather and silk armor. Mongol armor was light and flexible to preserve their mobility, often made of leather and silk. The silk undershirts worn beneath their armor were said to reduce the severity of arrow wounds. They also wore lamiral armor, which is a type of armor made from small rectangular plates, scales of iron, leather, or steel laced into horizontal rows. Helmets. Helmets were typically made of metal and could include a neck guard to protect against sword cuts. Shields. Shields were not commonly used by the Mongols because they would interfere with their archery, although some may have carried small shields on their backs. Mobility and endurance. The Mongols' tactics relied heavily on the mobility and endurance of their horses. Each warrior would typically have multiple mounts, allowing them to travel up to 100 miles a day. Retreats. They were masters of retreat, a tactic where they would pretend to be beaten and withdraw in apparent disarray, only to turn on their pursuing enemies with a deadly counterattack. Encirclement tactics. They often used encirclement tactics to surround their enemies and create confusion. Psychological warfare. The Mongols used psychological warfare effectively, spreading fear and terror ahead of their advances to demoralize enemy forces. Communication and command. They had a sophisticated system of flags, horns, and smoke signals to communicate across battlefields and coordinate their maneuvers. Scouting and intelligence. The Mongols placed a high value on scouting and intelligence gathering, often knowing the terrain and their enemy's disposition in detail before engaging. Adaptability. They adapted their strategies based on the enemy and the environment. For instance, against fortified cities, they would use siege tactics, whereas against mobile armies, they would emphasize their speed and archery. And Mongolia is a very diverse environment. You have deserts, you have mountains, you have very cold climates. They were able from a young age to be used to fighting in all kinds of different environments. Here are some of the goods that the Mongols brought to continents. The Silk Road was named after this valuable commodity, and the Mongols played a key role in the trade of silk between China and the Mediterranean region. Spices. The Mongols facilitated the trade of spices such as pepper, cinnamon, and ginger, which were highly sought after in European and Middle East. Porcelain. Chinese porcelain was highly prized in Europe, and the Mongols helped to transport it along the Silk Road. Precious metals and gems. Gold, silver, and gemstones were traded along the Silk Road, and the Mongol Empire's vast reach helped to facilitate this trade. Horses. The Mongols were renowned for their cavalry and the quality of their horses. They traded horses with various regions, including the Middle East and Europe. Gunpowder. The Mongols were instrumental in the spread of gunpowder from China to the Middle East and eventually to Europe. Textiles and clothing. Fine textiles and clothing from regions such as China and Central Asia were traded along the Silk Road with the help of the Mongol Empire. Agricultural products. Various agricultural products such as rice, fruits, and vegetables were traded across different regions under Mongol rule. Now, in the next video, because I don't want to make this video 6 hours long, something that is very interesting about the Mongol Empire is that they were able to conquer Afghanistan. In the next video, I will go over how they were able to conquer Afghanistan, which is considered the graveyard of empires, while Alexander the Great, while the USSR and the United States were not. And then I will conclude with the pros and the cons of the Mongol Empire.